Welcome to part 2 of our webinar on blockchain for global mobility, which will be presented by our subject matter expert, Sloane Brakeville from Fr8 Network. I am Magali and I work at the FIDI Global Alliance office in Brussels as Marketing and Communications Manager. Before leaving the floor to Sloane, I just quickly would like to present what we do in FIDI. So FIDI is the Federation of International Moving and Relocation Companies. Established 70 years ago, we now count over 600 members from all over the world. The one thing that sets our members apart from the rest is the famed quality seal, which is the only quality certification for the moving industry recognized worldwide. Now, FIDI has been around for a long time. And some people might ask, what is its relevance today? So we have seen over the past years a tremendous shift in the relocation business with the multiplication of stakeholders, a complex supply chain, an increasing burden of regulation and compliance requirements, complicated topics to stay on top of. So it's safe to say that the international moving ecosystem has become a complicated one, with many actors wanting a piece of the relocation cake. Now, how does FIDI fit into this ecosystem? Well, FIDI's purpose today is to create links between the different actors to help maintain a level of quality and of service to the benefit not only of its members, but also to the global mobility industry as a whole. Now, the underlying idea here is that we are all players in the same game, and by maintaining consistent and high common standards, we will all benefit from it in the long run. Now, cooperation is indeed key to stay relevant in our constantly changing world, and it's also the key principle underlying the concept of blockchain, which nicely brings us to today's subject. So just quickly before passing over the mic to Sloane, I just quickly want to present him to you. Now, like I said last time round, and you might have guessed after his excellent presentation last week, Sloane is a big blockchain fan and he does know what he's talking about. After working at IBM's blockchain labs for several years, he co-founded Fr8 Network. Fr8 Network seeks to build tools and platforms to improve the communication and the visibility of supply chain organizations, and more specifically in the transportation and logistics sector. But he is better placed to explain what that's all about. So Sloane, over to you. Just let me share my screen with you.
All right, thank you.
There we go.
All right. Do you see it?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, fantastic. No, thank you for the introduction. And more than happy to continue this where we left off. Like she mentioned, I've been in blockchain for a while, since 2013, actually, whenever I first discovered Bitcoin, and the passion has not stopped since. However, where I tend to find myself distinguishing amongst the other blockchain entrepreneurs out there is the real-world application that I can point directly to my time at IBM for inspiring. As much as there are fascinating data being gathered around how blockchain can be used in any numerous circumstances, I have found that supply chain and relocation as a niche of that being something that has immediate and profound benefits stemming from blockchain-based systems. Now, I'll show you as we go along that blockchain isn't necessarily a panacea for all things, and solving the problems in global mobility, amongst that supply chain and logistics, is something that is going to require an immense amount of coordination and effort. However, let us dive in. So today, I'll start with a quick review of blockchain. The technology itself is impactful, but what I want to really get into are the case studies and the applications of blockchain in a much broader technological stack. Now, we'll have very little deep technical conversations as part of this webinar, but I certainly encourage you to ask questions at the end, and I will be here for as long as necessary to answer some of those. All right, so let's dive in. What is blockchain? The example I like to get, and it really boils down to some of the uses of blockchain. Blockchain is a combination of a database and a messaging / consensus layer. And if we look at how messaging is most aptly compared to in the real world, think of a group text message chain in which, as this diagram shows, there may be about 4 people participating. Let's keep it related to mobility, and let's make the content relevant to potentially a mover arriving at a client's house. Now, the mover is going to come in, and let's say the client is also on this group text message, has informed that they've arrived at the client house. Now, everyone in the group message, as designed, will receive that same text and notification. However, unfortunately, the driver may have forgotten that the client is part of this group message or sent this to the wrong group message. And as a scathing note comes across showing that the guy that he's meeting has no idea what he's doing, he quickly realizes the error of his ways as the client receives that same text message, frantically deleting it. Unfortunately, the way this particular messaging application works, that message is not deleted for everyone in the similar style to how blockchain does not delete a message. It only adds new information. And so the messaging client has now informed the other members of the group message that the previous message was deleted by the originator. Now, blockchain is uniquely positioned as this append-only database. However, the example shown here with WhatsApp has a functional limitation in that the messaging client is kind of at the mercy of what WhatsApp, the owner of this technology, chooses to do. They could very easily adjust their messaging interface to actually allow for the deletion of messages in a group chat. And so on top of that weakness, I like to describe how that particular diagram is going to change as blockchain gets introduced. Now, what we saw earlier is a centralized model. At the very top here of this slide, you can see that hand representing the command and control type relationship that someone like WhatsApp or Facebook has over the applications that they create. That is a centralized, or as often the case in modern technology stacks, it is distributed. And distributed just simply means that major portions of the application, say the server structure, is going to reside in multiple locations around the world for security purposes, for quality of service purposes, for any number of reasons. It's a better architecture than one where all of the servers live in one location. However, both the top and middle diagrams here have that same hand that is in control. Should they choose to consolidate those distributed systems, then they can do so. Either way, you are simply at the mercy of the organization that is in charge. And so we move down to the bottom here, which is decentralized. And what a decentralized technology does is affords each individual dot in that diagram the autonomy to make a decision on what they want to build and support and maintain. And that autonomy, mixed with good software governance, allows for very strong and distributed software systems to get built. And that is the basis of blockchain. No one is in control. Everyone can choose which version of the software they run. And in theory, so long as everybody comes to agreement, the entire world is very much in sync, a similar way to the centralized system. So let's re-look at this diagram. Let's change the characters a little bit. We have the port authority, we have the transferee, an insurance company, and a relocation management company. Now, this is obviously a modified diagram. There's much more individuals who would be privy to some of the messages on this group chat, but for simplicity purposes, let's say in this example, the port authority acknowledges the arrival of the relevant container for the transferee at the port. Having sent this message in a distributed system, it's not going to a centralized institution and then immediately being discharged to everyone in the group. It now has to propagate along the channels of the node. And so there's a very slight, but important for the accuracy of this example, delay in the arrival of this in the fourth group message. Now, in a similar manner, a container delayed message is sent out. While bad news, it is important that everybody be aware of this in order to make adjustments. Now, that transparency, unfortunately, is while powerful and useful, misguided in this particular example. The Port Authority mistook a container as the one necessary for this group message, so they wish to delete this, showing that it is in fact not delayed, and thus the similar manner a message gets sent out to every other member in this network that the previous messages have been deleted. Now, bear in mind that without a central party, there's a lot of additional interesting things that happen. However, the implications of this are such that a neutral, completely self-sustained ecosystem of group message members can now communicate effectively. So let's dive in, right? As we've learned, blockchain technology, it's a foundational technology. It exists behind the scenes, and what you see on top as a consumer are applications like that group message that you saw before. It helps with coordination, helps with communication, all those challenges that the mobility and logistics industry faces. And it ensures an improvement by having everyone in the business network in sync around the data that they need to do their job. About 15 years ago, the global mobility space attempted to build a messaging hub. Now, what I would like to draw are some of the parallels between not only the messaging hub that unfortunately didn't fail, or unfortunately did not succeed, I would argue because it was a little bit too early, still had all of the same benefits that we can expect from incorporating blockchain and platform-like technology today. And so I'm going to dive into this case study with that in mind. So one of the bigger issues that we face when dealing with foundational technology is the fact that it requires the entire ecosystem to come on board in order to change. And as a parallel to having an entire ecosystem and business network on board, I'd like to give an example that is as relevant as I can possibly make it, that has the necessary data associated with the benefits, as blockchain is unfortunately lacking some really solid case studies that I could reference as an example. So let's talk about a very simple case study where a transferee is moving from one country to another. And I think everyone here can acknowledge that customer service is a critical component of your industry. And so dealing with personal effects, which can vary from important to comfort, like a bed or a dining room table, all the way up to priceless family heirlooms, is quite stressful. A bunch of questions typically get asked during relocation, but one that frequently pops up is, where's all my stuff? And unfortunately, that is frequently difficult to provide, whether it's a subcontracted truck driver who works for a small mom and pop that simply closed down for the day, and so you can't get information for 16 hours, or a customs broker that's giving a rough estimate of when they expect the container to be released based on a hunch. Is that lack of confidence really leads to a poor customer experience at the end of the day. But it's not necessarily the fault of the relocation management companies that more and more are in charge of passing on this information. There's dozens of individuals representing just as many institutions that are part of the relocation process, and almost all of them have their own way of doing things. And so, following this simple example, a transferee, primarily communicating with their relocation management company, is now thrown into the whirlpool of intercompany relationships, right? The relocation management company then has an insurer that may have to provide additional insurance if there were, say, priceless family heirlooms. They contract with a moving company at the origination. The moving company then, in theory, would take it to a port where a customs agent would then file the necessary paperwork, and the shipper would then load the container for its journey. At the destination, another customs agent is going to prepare the necessary import document packet, and then a moving company finally picks it up and delivers it to the new home of the transferee. This is, of course, a simplified and idealized version of the story, because in reality, there are all sorts of additional companies and individuals helping out. And so it's a mess of communication. It's a mess of coordination that still frequently, as we all know, revolves around emails and faxes and phone calls, and very rarely, but occasionally, we see direct integrations from one software system to another. And so to kind of hammer this point home, I reached out to a major relocation company that gets the question, when is my stuff going to get here? All the time, right? So as it turns out, this relocation company spends about 3 minutes each time they need to update not only to the shipper, but from the shipper around a shipment status. And with an average of about 8 to 10 updates for every shipment that comes through, they average around 30 minutes a shipment, which means if they were to do 5,000 transactions, 5,000 shipments over the course of a working year, that's over 300 days, 300 work days that are dedicated to simply updating a shipment status. You break that down, that's 10 full-time employees, and roughly equates to about $1 million per year of salary. That's, again, simply answering, when will my stuff get here? Now, they have a large firm, so they've also invested significantly in bringing that number down to simply 3 minutes per update. It could probably take longer for most firms. But this is an example of something that countless other companies are dealing with when trying to provide that high level of customer service. Now, like I mentioned earlier, very little, if any, case studies exist that significantly highlight how the mobility industry can benefit from blockchain just by itself. However, a lot of research has been done which gleams how harmonizing import and export, the business around that, can benefit from something similar to blockchain technology. And while it's not in its current form built on blockchain, the idea of what's called a single window solution, it has substantial parallels to blockchain solutions. A single window, as it's shown here, disseminates information to the relevant government bodies, which offer traders, infrastructure companies like ports, logistics service providers, and others the opportunity to use a digital means of handling trade procedures. The notion of this single window in which imports and exports will be processed in one location through customs, it's been around since the 1980s. Some countries are better integrated than others, directly correlating, as it's shown, to increases not only in trade, but in that nation's gross domestic product, or GDP. With very, very few exceptions, a digital single window has improved the economies of those nations which fully adopt them. The single window helps in predicting when will my stuff get here and answering that question by simply answering a sub-part of that question, which is, when will my stuff clear customs? And so if we look at the adoption of single windows since the 80s and some of the case studies around that, what does that show us? Some really profound information, actually. In the Philippines, for example, customs custody time was reduced from 4 to 4 to 6 hours from 6 to 8 days previously. Now, that's a type of shipment that comes to the Philippines, but that kind of delay is very costly, not only for the merchants who are dealing with that, but also in the case of maybe perishable goods, there's a significant advantage to this. Korea has also done a very good job implementing single window systems. And according to estimates from Korea's own customs service, they adopted something called UniPass, which led to private sector savings of $2.4 billion per year just in logistics costs. As a side note to that, they also were capable and allowed to reduce their customs staff by 130 employees. So nice tax savings there to the tax-paying citizens of Korea as a side effect. Another analysis used very, very good data to show that simplifying and harmonizing trade documents, amongst other things, could reduce the total trade costs by 15.5% for certain countries. Now, that's a profound saving that simply adopting, again, this one type of harmonizing technology, the single window, could provide. We've also seen that research into single windows has indicated that they are some of the best in terms of long-term savings, and that is despite the fact that developing and integrating them is quite a cumbersome and long-term process. So some of these statistics will hopefully show to you that while not directly called blockchain, these types of technologies that are in the same foundational technology as blockchain have profound implications for how economies and trade will function. Now, you can think of very similar parallels to the mobility industry by showing how the delays and the cost in moving an individual from one country to another can be abated through the incorporation of something like a single window that the logistics industry benefits from. And not only would you be able to clear customs quicker if the appropriate authorities were also integrated here, but you would also provide a profoundly improved level of customer service. And the answer to those where and when will my stuff arrive becomes that much easier. So moving on, what would that business network look like? How would bringing blockchain and similar technology to that single window really manifest if it were to be adopted by the mobility industry? Well, let's take a look at this very simplified architectural diagram right here. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up, right? On the bottom, you see the blockchain. Now, this is a foundational technology upon which things will be built. But the blockchain is modeled by a database here. It is fundamentally a database with some specific rules set around it. Over here on the left, we have the cheap and scalable data storage that would help the blockchain be used only for very specific and very relevant purposes. Integrating with those two data stores are the methods and the functions that change and manipulate that data. The APIs that you can see are things like an update API, where if something is delayed at port, it would go through the APIs and it would post into the database, and then that message would then get sent out to the various entities that need to know that there's been a delay. And then we have access control built around that. Of course, that is something that has to exist today because not everyone needs to know about everyone's shipments. It's a matter of privacy, not only for the individual moving, but also for the businesses that may have some kind of competitive advantage over their peers and don't need certain metadata available to everyone. So with access control, APIs, and then various forms of data storage, we have a platform. Now, what would that platform be used for? Well, there'd be a lot of integration that happens, right? It would be behind the scenes while any number of software systems then simultaneously integrate with that, so that anyone who is moving and whoever has been contracted that maybe uses one of these solutions would then be able to benefit from having the core data associated with that move stored in a centralized location that is maintained by ideally a neutral and not-for-profit organization. So let's relook at that same example before. Say similar diagram, except now we've got a blockchain ecosystem behind the scenes. We have your delivery driver who is in charge of dropping something off at the customer site. You have the warehouse owner, a transferee, and the relocation management company all working together in this particular instance to clear a shipment from a warehouse located at the port. So the driver goes to pick it up from the warehouse company and was denied for whatever reason. He's not sure just yet, but he wanted to send an update out to the community. Now, that API is what is allowing us to send and disseminate this information amongst all the other nodes in our decentralized network here. The relocation management company and transferee can now begin to adjust, and the warehouse company has not said anything, and so they're basically agreeing with the fact that yes, they were denied entry here. And so delivery driver, having received more information from this warehouse company, indicates that they need another bill of lading sent out as soon as possible so they can clear the warehouse rules. Now, that information gets sent out, of course. Who's in charge of the bill of lading? Well, let's say it's the relocation management company, who indicates that they will now send a copy within 24 hours. Everyone's informed that this is the solution to the particular problem, and as part of knowing that it's going to be a 24-hour process to get that driver the documentation he needs, that driver can adjust and maybe go do another load on behalf of a different customer, and so that he's not lost his salary for the day. But in addition, the transferee now has an idea of when they can expect to receive their stuff. Might be another 24 hours before they get it. So again, improvements in customer service, improvements in communication lead to all sorts of downhill effects. And this is where not only blockchain technology is something that is foundational, but as exemplified by those single window systems, we will see in the future, hopefully, this neutral platform emerge that allows for communication about the status of a shipment over time. And that's all I got for you today. Happy to turn the microphone back over to Magali, who can throw me any questions that have been asked so far.
Thank you very much, Sloane. Now, I think this nicely brings the blockchain world to our relocation world. I have some interesting questions that came through while you were talking, so I will just throw them at you, and I'll let you answer them the best you can. So the first one relates back to some of the examples that you gave of how a blockchain could help smoothen and streamline the processes within our industry. And you gave as an example the customs clearance process. Now the question is, what other use cases do you believe can be applied to the relocation industry?
So customs is a major one, right? But when it comes to warehousing and particularly the damaging of goods, putting the responsibility on the party who did damage that client's goods is an exercise in not only patience, but it can get very ugly very quickly. And a use case that I've seen that's becoming more and more popular as technology like wearable devices and cell phones and computer systems become increasingly cheap are the Internet of Things, as they call it, where effectively the customer would put a smart chip on their goods, and such that when they're in transit, that chip will collect data about, hey, have I been exposed to any amount of moisture? Have I been exposed to rough handling by measuring the accelerometer? Have I been potentially lost? And is there GPS indicators of where I am right now? That sort of technology is going to very quickly emerge, and especially with more pricey shipments, it makes a lot more sense to include some of that technology in the container itself. So, with that data being generated and sending it out to a platform that is blockchain enabled, you now allow for some people like an insurance company to come in and read that data, understand that it is secured and stored in an immutable database, which is that blockchain, and then make a decision based on who is responsible for paying out the damages that may have occurred while in shipment. So that's one additional area where you can certainly see this sort of foundational technology being used to improve a couple of different ecosystem participants.
Yeah, I think that you touched on two key issues that we do hear a lot about, which would be traceability and accountability, which is, I think, key to anybody's customer service improvement. I think those would be two main issues that would definitely need some help in our industry, like in any other industry as well. So, next question. At one point you talk about the single window model, and so the question that one listener put through is, what would communication in a single window model look like for sharing customs documentation as done in other countries? Is there ever any thought of having discretion in communication at some point?
Yeah, so the concept of single window is built entirely with one entity in mind, the government, right? And while subgroupings within the government are the ones that are communicating about the various necessary documents to clear customs. I mean, you've got the tax authority, you've got the port authority. There's all sorts of institutions that are involved in clearing customs, and so that single window provided all the information to them in a simultaneous way. Now, that information has discretion in and of itself, right? So the Port Authority needs to know bits of information about your shipment, but the tax authority needs to know a lot more about what's included inside that shipment and what its value is perceived to be. Is it even allowed into the country at all? If it is, how much should we levy in taxes against it, etc.? And so that discretion of data is important to partition out to those relevant authorities. Now, it's a very, very similar model, but just on a slightly larger scale with slightly larger amounts of institutions involved in processing that data when we look at how this platform could exist for global mobility. But foundationally, it's the same. You still need to have the ability to partition out data to the relevant individuals who need to act upon it.
And over on our side of the big pond, GDPR is still very, very big, and we've heard through the grapevines that the European institutions are currently working, or discussing at least, a project of maybe using more blockchain or foundational technology, like you called it, to ensure and to enforce more transparency and more, again, accountability of private data and the use of private data. So it's definitely something to keep to look out for. So I think we are onto something that is going to change our world for much more than we believe. Okay, next question. So at one point you say that developing a potential blockchain project would be costly and a long-term process. Now, this is a very practical question. What is your estimated cost to develop a platform in our world, and how about the maintenance cost related to that?
As part of doing my research, I actually did stumble across some statistics on what a single window system costs. For example, in Guatemala, they were able to implement it very cheap price of $1 million. They went out to the private sector and contracted with private sector institutions to build it. Now, there's ongoing maintenance for that particular software system of about 1.2 million, according to what I read, but they also charge SaaS fees and transaction fees to the people who use it. So, there's additional costs associated with that, which are not directly reported. But something of this nature, I couldn't begin to estimate. It's definitely in the millions, but there are some really great technologies that we can employ in order to reduce that price. I know IBM's TradeLens is open source, and so there's a possibility of taking what they've worked on and building a logistics platform and spinning that off in a way that is much more beneficial to mobility directly. So it's really tough to say. But it's I think well worth the price and well worth the headache of building it when you look down the line at the potential return on that investment.
And I guess it also depends on the scope of the process you want to cover with the platform, right? The more actors you involve and the more steps you want to cover, the more, of course, the whole framework grows and the price with it, I can imagine. Next question.
Absolutely.
And next question still has to do with the single window example that you gave. So this particular listener says that single window doesn't use blockchain technology and it is less expensive and has proven to work. So why is blockchain needed?
Blockchain is needed for something that a single window innately provides. A single window has trust built into it because it is built and maintained by the government that operates it. And so you not only have to trust it, but you also don't really have a choice. As you come in through this single window for that country, you're kind of at the mercy of what the various governmental institutions are forcing you to use. So yes, it can be built on whatever technology you want at that point, and so long as it's secure enough and gets the job done, then you can benefit from much cheaper and proven technologies like the cloud systems that we have today in the centralized model. Blockchain comes into the picture here, and in the mobility industry in particular, in context of this platform idea, in that it allows for an innate ability to sort of check the powers that be, the leaders of the institution that may be building and supporting this for the industry as a whole. The beauty of blockchain, as we've seen through the different fracturing of camps that have, for whatever reason, different beliefs and where technology like Bitcoin, for example, could go. They have performed what's called a hard fork. And similar model to a fork in the road, you have to take a left or a right. You're not given a choice of going straight anymore. These two camps have then built competing technology, and that's where you see the Bitcoin versus the Bitcoin Cash dynamic pop up. So when we look at how the blockchain can be used in this instance, yes, it may be slightly more burdensome and slightly more challenging to build on, but that's where design principles come into the picture, and we take advantage, as I showed in that diagram, of conventional, cheap, scalable data storage, and very modern architectures that have been proven to work in conjunction with blockchain for very specific things that require an innate sense of trust for those who would be then using it and sharing their data accordingly.
Great. Well, it's great that you mentioned Bitcoin, because it leads nicely to the next question that we have. So here it said that most blockchain projects that we usually hear about use cryptocurrency or crypto assets. Would you think it would be useful in the global mobility world as well?
At some point, I believe, yes. Tokens and the token economics that come in the world of game theory, that a lot of these blockchain ecosystems that are kind of sputtering up right now take advantage of, is something that will certainly come into the picture in the long term. But for now, I think it adds an unnecessary level of complication, except for maybe something that is behind the scenes used for accounting purposes. The movement of a digital currency on a blockchain is something that is very, very easy to track and monitor and maintain. And that has implications and advantages by itself. But for now, we have to look at the scope of work that is necessary to just kind of get started. And I don't believe that immediately, at least, a token is necessary for this particular instance.
Well, and this nicely leads us to the last question of the day, which kind of opens up the whole debate and brings it to a more philosophical level. So the question is, what is the process to get the whole of the moving industry to embrace blockchain technology and agree to share sensitive information? How will it start, and what will be the steps along the way? Now, this is a difficult one. I'll let you answer first, and then I'll go.
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? I think it starts first with education and showing the industry as a whole the benefits that can be obtained, not only in customer service, but in return on investment for participating in something that is so ecosystem and business network led. Now, I would say the first step is establishing a single use case, one where the industry as a whole can jump on board, or at least a very large portion of the industry. Maybe it's not insurance related, maybe it's not banking related, but maybe it's fundamental to improving customer service. Something like, let's all share updates on if there's any major delays in a transfer of ownership, right? Where a truck driver hands over somebody's goods to a port, for example. So getting a couple of those major steps put onto a platform of this size, and then experimenting with that, going, all right, we've got 8 people and then 8 companies that are agreeing to participate in this. Assuming it works, then we'll open up the floor for all sorts of other institutions to come on board. And so I certainly encourage, as we say in Silicon Valley, a lean startup type of model, where you're not building the entire platform at once, but are instead taking very small steps and making sure that you not only have education and buy-in and interest from the community at large, but also can justify some of the budget expenditures that will come in with it by doing some good analysis of what's going to become your return on investment.
Well, and I think, yes, and that absolutely goes into the same direction as we see it from FIDI's point of view. Now, FIDI as a non-commercial organization, we definitely see the benefit from a quality standard point of view, because I think that the main pain point that we see in our world is this multitude of processes and procedures which just make everybody's life complicated and which create a lot of risk and make risk management a very daunting task. So we definitely would recommend as well, like you said, a step-by-step approach and allow for some kind of organic growth where you really start with something we all know and we all manage, and then just keep growing from there slowly by including more and more actors, more and more stakeholders, and definitely by building on existing standardization efforts. And so, like you said, I think the first step is what we're already doing. We at FIDI, together with you, together with the IAM, together with other industry bodies, which is definitely, first of all, to create awareness and education, because, of course, we all know that what people don't know, well, they won't embrace. So the first step, if we want to create any kind of project like that, would definitely first to explain the benefits and explain what everybody could gain from it. And then, like you said before, by talking about the trade lanes project, there are many things happening out there. And I think by closely following and monitoring a bit, examples of projects that exist and learn from their mistakes and learn from their difficulties, that might help us speed up the process from our side. I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel all over again when there are already so many existing and working projects out there. And then one thing that we really think that we should start working on slowly now, because efforts already exist, is to create a real standardization framework. And that's an effort that needs to be industry-wide. It can't be everybody in their corner. And that's where the keyword cooperation really comes into play. And I think over the past few years, we've seen great advances in the moving and relocation industry, especially between the IAM and FIDI, with the PCGs, with the ISO standard for packing lists, which is slowly gaining traction as well. And I think that there are so many standardization efforts already existing and so many working best practices that it's really a case of sitting everybody around a table and creating an engagement there as well. And I think that's where international organizations like ours, or like Omni, or like the IAM really have their role to play. Because the next step would, of course, be to make those standards mandatory requirements. But I think that's still a bit of a time before us, before that becomes reality. And of course, I mean, again, another big role that we have to play, we as international organizations, again, is to provide a forum for debate and change, where we have the possibility of sitting many different stakeholders who might see themselves as competitors. We have maybe the power to sit them all down together and maybe get talking about the benefits of the industry as a whole, and see the whole scene as a cake that we need to eat all together. Otherwise, no one will be able to eat it. So I think definitely the main keywords from a more philosophical and non-commercial standpoint are transparency and industry-wide cooperation. That's definitely key for any kind of interoperability project, if ever we want to get it off the ground. And seeing what's happening in the wider world of logistics and transportation, I really think that we do need to start working on it very quickly. So Sloane, from our side, those were all the questions that came through today. I think that we have a very interesting debate still before us, and there are definitely things happening in the background. So, well, I'm sure we will hear from you very soon again, and we will definitely keep this conversation going. So, if anybody has some questions for us or wants to comment, or just to continue talking about this fascinating subject, you can send us an email to us or to Sloane, or you can find us on social media as well, or you can see us at the IAM convention in Chicago, which is bound to start next week, and we will be happy to continue debating on this fascinating subject. So thank you for joining the second part of our webinar, and we will put the recording on our public YouTube channel very soon, so watch this space. Please stay in touch and keep up to date with us, and I hope to see you soon again. I will now close the session. I wish you all a great day or evening or a good night, depending on where you might be in this wide world of ours, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you and goodbye.